The dog would not leave the janitor. Deputy Ryan Brandt had given the recall 3 times. The release word. The emergency command Ghost had never once ignored in 4 years of tracking. And the big German shepherd just pressed harder against the leg of the man holding the mop and looked up at him like he'd found something he'd spent his whole life missing. Outside, the snow was coming down sideways. A 7-year-old boy had been gone for 40 minutes. The temperature was dropping a degree every 10 minutes, and the light was already failing behind the ridge. Brandt pulled the leash. The dog didn't move. Ghost, heel, nothing. The janitor set the mop against the wall. He crouched down slow, the way a man crouches when his knees have already paid for things, and he put one wide hand flat on the dog's chest. He said one word. It wasn't English. It was low and clipped, and it came out of him like it had been waiting a long time in the dark. The dog went still. Then the dog sat. Every deputy in that hallway turned to look at the man in the gray work shirt with Silver Creek Elementary stitched over the pocket. Nobody in that town had ever really looked at him before. They were about to. Before we go on, tell us where you're watching from in the comments below. If this story moves you, please subscribe and stay with it until the very end. We read every single comment. And what you're about to hear will remind you that the people who matter most are often the ones we never bothered to see. His name was Cole Hayes, and for 2 years he had been the most invisible man in Silver Creek, Colorado. He was 43, built lean and long through the shoulders, the kind of build that doesn't come from a gym, but from a life that never let the body soften. His dark hair was cut short and going gray at the sides. There was a thin white scar through his right eyebrow, and a nose that had been broken more than once and set by someone in a hurry. But it was the eyes people would have noticed, if any of them had ever bothered to look. A flat, patient gray. The color of the sky before a storm has decided what it is going to do. They were the eyes of a man who had watched difficult things happen and had trained himself, at great cost, not to look away. He moved through the school the way water moves through a canyon, quietly, along the edges, taking the shape of the space around him. He mopped the gym after the children went home. He fixed the boiler the district had refused to replace for 11 winters. He shoveled the front walk before the buses came, in the dark, so that no child would ever slip. He was not unfriendly. Life had simply worn away the part of him that used to speak first. He had learned that the men who talk least are usually the ones who have the most they've chosen not to say. What none of them knew, what he had never told a single soul in that town, was that Cole Hayes had spent 20 years as a Navy SEAL. Senior Chief Petty Officer, 3 combat deployments, Ramadi, then the Korengal Valley, then 11 months in Helmand Province, that he had signed his name promising never to describe. He had come home with a Purple Heart he kept in a coffee can. A right hand that still went numb in the cold from the shrapnel that took 2 of the men standing beside him, and a silence he had carried across an ocean and never found the bottom of. Overseas he had worked alongside military working dogs, had learned their language, their loyalty, the particular grief of losing one. He knew what a good dog was worth. He knew it was more than most men. He had come to Silver Creek to disappear, not to hide from anyone, to hide from the noise inside his own head, which only ever quieted when his hands were busy and no one needed anything from him. The mop, the boiler, the dark early mornings, they were the closest thing to peace he had found in a decade. He had decided he would live small and quiet for the rest of his life, and he had almost convinced himself that was the same thing as being at rest. He had no idea that the storm coming over the ridge was about to end all of that. The dog watching him now was called Ghost. He was a 6-year-old German shepherd, 82 pounds of black and tan, with a coat that shed the snow before it could reach his skin. His muzzle had gone slightly gray, and there was a hard ridge of scar tissue along his left flank where he'd been opened up on a deployment years before any deputy in Colorado had ever met him. Because Ghost had a history almost no one knew. Before the county sheriff's office had taken him in, he had been a military working dog, retired out of the same world Cole Hayes had left behind. He had cleared rooms. He had found men who did not want to be found. He had lost a handler once, in a way the paperwork described in 4 flat words and never explained. He moved with the clean, economical confidence of an animal who had learned the difference between noise and threat, and who had stopped wasting himself on noise a long time ago. And from the moment he had walked into that school and caught the scent of the man with the mop, Ghost had not been interested in anyone else. Silver Creek sat in a fold of the Colorado high country, a town of maybe 2,000 people wrapped around one main street, a grain elevator, and a church with a bell that still rang at noon. Behind the elementary school, the land climbed into a dark shoulder of pine and aspen that the locals called the Ridge, and beyond that it fell away into a creek bed and a stretch of country a careful adult could get turned around in on a clear day. This was not a clear day. By 3 that afternoon, the sky had gone the color of old iron, and the first snow had come sideways off the ridge with a sound like static. The air had a bite that got into the teeth. It smelled like cold metal and pine and something older underneath, the particular emptiness of high country in winter. It was the kind of storm that makes the world smaller by the minute. The most powerful man in Silver Creek was named Preston Calloway, and he had never in his life been told no by anyone who mattered. He was 56, silver-haired, with the soft, deliberate hands of a man who paid other people to do the lifting. His company, Calloway Development, had built half the town, the strip mall out by the highway, the new subdivision on the east side, the bank. He held the note on the feed store, a seat on the board of the church, and the presidency of the Silver Creek School Board, which he ran the way he ran everything, as a formality that existed to confirm what he had already decided. That autumn, Preston had decided 2 things. The first was that the wooded ridge land behind the school, 60 acres the district had held for 40 years, was worth a great deal more as building lots than as trees, and he had spent months quietly moving the sale through a board that did not dare cross him. The second was that the school's custodial and aide staff were an expense he could cut. At a public board meeting 3 weeks earlier, he had done exactly that, eliminating 2 classroom aide positions and cutting the janitor to part-time. When a teacher objected that the aides were the ones who watched the youngest children at dismissal, Preston had smiled and said, into a live microphone, in front of the whole town, "We are not in the business of babysitting. If a parent wants a nanny, they can afford one. This district runs on results, not sentiment." Everyone in that room had heard it. Everyone had let it go. That was how it worked with Preston Calloway. You let it go, or you learned what it cost not to. The boy's name was Eli Mercer, and he was 7 years old, and he was the kind of child who made grown adults go quiet without quite knowing why. His father was a staff sergeant in the Army, 8 months into a deployment on the other side of the world, and Eli had decided, in the private, enormous way that small children decide things, that while his dad was gone, it was his job to be brave. He lived with his grandmother Ruth in a small house 2 blocks from the school. He did not cry when the other kids talked about their fathers coming to games. He kept his father's photograph in his backpack and did not show it to anyone. In the afternoons, back when the aides used to keep the little ones inside until pickup, Eli had taken to lingering near the janitor's cart, and Cole Hayes, who had recognized something in the boy that he did not have a word for, had let him. Some days Eli swept beside him and said nothing at all, and that was the best conversation Cole had all week. But the aides were gone now. Preston had cut them. And on the afternoon the storm came in early, in the loose, unwatched few minutes between the last bell and the buses. Eli Mercer walked out the side door toward the ridge, because he had seen something moving in the trees, and there was no longer anyone standing there to tell him not to. By the time anyone noticed, the snow had swallowed the parking lot. The office had counted heads for the late bus and come up one short. Ruth Mercer had driven up to find her grandson not standing where he always stood, and the sound she made when she understood, that low, breaking sound, went through the whole building. Somebody called the county. Somebody called Preston, because in Silver Creek you called Preston, and within 20 minutes the front lot was full of trucks and flashing light bars and the particular loud helplessness of adults who don't yet know what to do. Cole Hayes was in the gym when he heard. He set the mop against the wall, and something in him that had been asleep for 2 years opened its eyes. He walked out into the hallway just as Deputy Ryan Brandt came through the front doors with Ghost. Preston Calloway was already there, in a camel coat that had never once seen weather, running the room the way he ran everything, telling the deputies the boy had probably just walked home, telling Ruth to calm down, telling everyone there was no need to overreact, no need to call the news, no need to make this into something. He had a development vote in 9 days. He did not say that part out loud. Cole crossed the hallway toward Brandt. "The ridge," he said quietly. If he went anywhere, he went up the ridge. "There's a game trail behind the fence line. A boy would take it." Preston turned. He looked at the gray work shirt, the mop water still on the man's hands, and something in his face curdled into a smile. "Sit down," he said. "This is a matter for professionals. Go mop something." A few people laughed, because you laughed at what Preston said. Cole didn't answer. He had been spoken to like that by men far more dangerous than Preston Calloway, in places where the wrong word got people killed, and he had learned long ago that silence was a country you could live in. And then Ghost moved. The dog crossed the whole length of that hallway on his own, past his handler, past the deputies, past Preston, and pressed his body against Cole Hayes' leg and would not be moved. Brandt stared. In 4 years, the dog had never once broken to a stranger. "Ghost," Brandt said. "Heel." The dog didn't even look at him. For 20 minutes, they did it Preston's way. The deputies drove the roads around town with their spotlights, certain the boy had wandered home. They knocked on doors. They checked the culvert by the highway. And the whole time the snow came harder off the ridge, and the temperature slid past 20 degrees and kept falling. And Ruth Mercer stood in the school doorway with a coat somebody had draped over her shoulders, watching the tree line and saying nothing at all. It was Deputy Brandt who broke first. He had been watching his dog. Ghost had spent the entire 20 minutes at Cole's side, faced toward the ridge, ears up, the hackles standing along his spine in a hard line, the exact posture the dog took when he had a scent and was being kept from it. Brandt had worked with that animal long enough to know the difference between a distraction and a signal. This was a signal. "You said a game trail," Brandt said, coming over. "Behind the fence. There used to be a fence." Cole nodded at the dark line of the ridge. It came down in October, when the survey crews cut through for the land sale. Brandt looked at him. "How do you know that?" "I shovel this lot every morning in the dark. I watch this ground." Cole crouched by the dog, and Ghost turned his head and looked at him, and something passed between the man and the animal that Brandt would never quite be able to describe when he told the story later. There's an open cut through the tree line now. A gap. A scared kid runs downhill, and he runs toward what looks like shelter. Downhill from that gap is the creek bed. If the water isn't frozen through, and it isn't yet, that's where the cold gets you first. Behind them, Preston's voice rose. He was on the phone now, and the words carrying across the lot were not about the boy. They were about liability and press, and whether the sheriff understood what kind of position this put the district in. Ruth Mercer heard it too. She turned and looked at Preston Calloway with an expression that would have stopped a better man, and Preston looked down at his shoes. Cole was already unzipping the gray work jacket, already pulling the good gloves out of the cart he'd stocked himself, already checking the light he kept clipped inside it, out of a 20-year habit he had never managed to break. "I'm going up," he said. "I'll take the dog." "You can't take my dog," Brandt said. But he said it like a man who already knew he had lost the argument to something older than his authority. That was when Preston Calloway made his mistake in front of everyone. He came off the phone and into the middle of the lot with his voice pitched to Carrie, and he said that no one was going up that ridge in this weather, that it was a legal and physical impossibility, that the responsible course was to wait for the state search team out of the county seat, which could not reach Silver Creek for 3 hours. 3 hours. He said it the way he said everything, as a decision already made. He said it would be reckless to let go. And here he looked at Cole, a maintenance employee, wander onto district property that was mid-transaction and get himself hurt. For a moment, the lot went quiet. Because Preston was powerful, and because 3 hours sounded like caution, and caution sounds like wisdom when you are afraid, and a 7-year-old boy in a thin jacket had already been in the snow for over an hour. Ruth Mercer began to cry without any sound at all, which is the worst kind. And Cole Hayes looked at the dark shoulder of the ridge, and he did the math he had spent a career learning how to do, the math of cold and time and the small body of a child, and how long was left before there was nothing left to find. The answer was not 3 hours. The answer was now. Ghost pressed his whole weight against Cole's leg and let out a single low sound. Not a bark, almost a word. Cole reached down and put his hand on the dog's head. He had promised himself he would live small and quiet for the rest of his life. He understood, in that moment, that the promise had never really been his to keep. He crouched in the snow, at eye level with the animal, and he gave the command again, the low, clipped word that was not English, the one that had made every deputy in the hallway turn an hour before. It was a working dog's command, from a working dog's war, in a language most of the people in that lot had only ever heard in movies. Ghost's whole body changed. The dog came up off his haunches and locked onto Cole with an attention so total it was almost frightening to watch. Ready, waiting, his and Deputy Ryan Brandt, standing in the snow, understood before anyone else did that the man in the janitor's shirt had handled dogs like this before, in places none of them wanted to imagine, and that whoever he was not what the little brass name on his shirt said he was. Preston Calloway stepped in front of him. I said no. This is my board, my property, my Senior Chief Petty Officer, United States Navy. Cole said it quietly, buttoning the jacket, not raising his voice at all. It was the first time in 2 years he had said the words out loud, and they came out steady and worn and true. 20 years. 3 deployments. I have carried children out of worse than this in the dark, Mr. Calloway, while men were shooting at me. I am not asking your permission. I am telling you what is about to happen. The lot had gone silent. Deputy Brandt was already nodding, already keying his radio, already a man who had chosen his side. Somewhere in the crowd, the teacher who had sat through that board meeting 3 weeks ago put her hand over her mouth. "You're a janitor," Preston said. But his voice had lost its floor. "I'm a lot of things," Cole said. "So are you, and every single person standing in this lot is going to remember which of them we were tonight." He turned to Brandt. "Give me a radio in 40 minutes. Keep everyone else off that ridge, so I've got only 1 cent to run." And then he was moving. And the dog was moving with him, and the two of them crossed the parking lot and went through the broken fence line into the trees and the white and the dark. And the last thing the crowd saw was the shepherd flowing out ahead of the man like a shadow that had finally found the thing casting it. Up on the ridge there was no plan left, no framework, only the old machinery coming back online. The reading of ground and wind, the trick of looking slightly to the side of the flashlight beam to catch movement. The discipline of moving fast without moving careless. Ghost worked the gap in the fence, cast twice, and committed downhill toward the creek with a certainty that needed no words. Cole followed the dog, and the dog followed the boy, and the snow tried to bury all 3 of them. He found Eli Mercer at the bottom of the cut, against the base of a lightning-split pine, curled around himself the way small animals curl when the cold has gotten into the deepest part of them. The boy was conscious. Barely, his lips had gone the wrong color, and he was past shivering, which is the part that kills you. And when the beam found his face, he looked up and saw the big dog first and then the man, and he said, in a voice like a single thread, "I saw a dog in the trees. I wanted to help it." There had been no dog in the trees. There had only ever been this one, waiting an hour in a warm hallway for a man to remember who he was. Cole got the boy inside his own jacket, against the heat of his own chest, the way he had been taught a lifetime ago. He keyed the radio. Then he started back up the cut with Eli's face tucked under his chin and Ghost breaking trail ahead of them through snow now up to the dog's chest. And behind him, faint through the storm, he could already hear the sound of the whole town coming up the ridge to meet them. By the following May, the snow was long gone from the ridge, and the aspens had come back green, and the 60 acres the school board had almost sold stayed exactly where they were. Eli Mercer lost the tips of 2 toes to the frostbite and nothing else, which the doctors called a miracle, and Ruth called an answer to prayer, and she was not wrong either way. His father came home from deployment in March and drove straight from the airport to a school assembly where the whole town had gathered. Staff Sergeant Mercer stood in front of everyone and could not finish what he had meant to say. He simply walked down off the stage and put his arms around the quiet man in the gray work shirt who had gone up the mountain for his son. Preston Calloway did not last the spring. The story of what he had said in that parking lot, 3 hours, maintenance employee, mid-transaction, went through Silver Creek the way fire goes through dry grass. The land deal died in committee. At the next election, he lost his board seat to a second-grade teacher by a margin that left no room for interpretation. He sold the development company the following year and moved somewhere warmer, where no one knew the story yet. And Ghost never really went back to being the county's dog. He had chosen, the way the best of them choose, once and completely. The sheriff's office made it official in the fall, a retirement, a folded certificate, a leash handed across a desk, and the big shepherd went home to a small house on the edge of town, where a man who had spent 20 years learning how to disappear was, at last, done disappearing. You could see them most evenings on the porch, the man with the storm-colored eyes, and the dog who had refused to leave him, watching the light go down soft and gold behind the ridge. Sometimes the person who will save your life is the one you never once bothered to see. Sometimes he is mopping a floor while you decide he is beneath your notice, carrying a whole war folded up quietly inside a gray work shirt, waiting without even knowing he is waiting. For the moment, he will be needed again. God rarely announces where he has hidden his strongest people. He tucks them into ordinary lives, into small towns and quiet jobs and the empty hallways of schools, and he trusts that when the storm finally comes, they will remember who they are. The measure of a man was never the title stitched on his shirt, or the size of his name on the side of a building. It was what he was willing to walk into the dark for, expecting nothing, asking no one's permission, carrying someone else's child home against the cold. If Cole and Eli's story touched your heart, share it with someone who needs to be reminded that the quiet ones among us are often the strongest. Leave a comment and tell us where you're watching from, and if there's someone in your own life the world overlooked, someone who turned out to be far more than anyone guessed, we would love to hear about them. Your story might be the light someone else needs tonight. And if you believe in stories of courage, loyalty, and second chances, don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you never miss the next journey. May God bless you, protect your family, and remind you always that the people who matter most are rarely the ones the world applauds, and that you are never, ever alone.